Imagine being elected president of the American Dental Association right before, unbeknownst to you, one of the biggest years for public dentistry and being on the forefront of a big old debate around fluoride. Well, that's what Dr. Brett Kessler walked into when he took on his presidency of the American Dental Association this last year. We talk about the triumphs and the grief and some of the difficulties for him this last year in his position of service and how he was challenged quite a bit, and it became what he calls one of the hardest years of his life, and he really had to use all of the tools he ever learned in his world of sobriety. Brett is a dear friend both personally and professionally and has forever changed my personal and professional life. And we talk a bit about that as well on this episode. And what's next after serving as president and then also being a dentist for your entire career. Shares with us his next chapter, which I'm super excited to share with you today. And a lot of what he talks about is also what we talk about inside the Empowered Leadership Experience for Women in Dentistry, which is really unpacking what is it that you want to do next in your life and what are your core desires and beliefs, and really figuring out what are your values. And Brett really had to dig into his values as well, as he was in this really critical service position that he thought he was ready for and realized that it was a whole lot more than he ever anticipated. And his mental, spiritual, emotional, and physical fitness really had to come into play in order for him to serve the way this industry deserves. Let's dive in. Hi, Brett. So good to have you back on The Real Talk of Dental. It's always such an honor to have you on. I'm so excited to have this conversation with you today because you are officially complete with your term as president of the American Dental Association. So you're heading into a new era of your life and a new chapter. And I want to hear all about this last year and also what's next for you. So I've been really looking forward to this conversation. And obviously, you know, I'm a huge fan of you and you've had such a huge impact on my life personally and professionally, in my sobriety and recovery too. So all the different angles, and I know you bring all of that into your work as well. So I'm excited to see how this all blends together in this conversation. So welcome back, and tell me, how the hell was this last year for you? Let it rip.
Thanks, Brandy. It is great to be here. If my memory serves correctly, I was your very first guest on your podcast.
You were my very first guest. Yes, you were my very first
It's
guest.
so good to
Huge
be back
honor.
here. And it's been like almost a
Yeah.
year. Has it been? How long has
Yeah.
it been?
Well, no. We launched in August.
All right. So half the
yeah.
year.
So less
So
than a year.
6 months.
Yeah, about half a year.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
That's great.
Mm-hmm.
I'm glad you're still doing this. You got a great message to share, and I appreciate the opportunity to be back here. Yeah, last year as president of the American Dental Association, one of the most challenging years of my life, but to be honest with you, it was probably the best year of my life. I had this deep sense of gratitude to have the opportunity to lead the organization and the profession. I had a very busy year, lots of interesting things that popped up, but I honestly, going in, I had a very clear idea of the things that I wanted to try and drive forward, and I got to accomplish all of that, despite all the drama du jour and the interesting happenings that came in front of my desk. So it was one of the most challenging years of my life, but honestly, one of the best years of my life, and something I'll always look back fondly on because I know I gave everything, every minute of every single day I was in office.
Yeah. And what were some of the highlights for you this last year?
So many. I guess I would start with last January, right before Donald Trump's inauguration, the ADA, we took out the back page ad on the Washington Post in the front section and put an editorial there. It basically said, "We are the American Dental Association. This is who we are. This is what we stand for. And this is what we can do to help make America healthy." Basically throwing it out to the new administration and to the world that we want to work with you to help improve the health of the citizens of this country. And the world was watching. And so it was one of the biggest media days of the year. We set out from the get-go of the administration in a big way. Followed that up with a personal letter from me to President Trump and to every single member of Congress, basically explaining a lot of these things, that how we can align with the MAHA project that they were embarking on to make America healthy again from an oral health perspective. And there were obviously things that we could help with, and there were things that we were going to kind of challenge against them. And I think we did both. And so it was great. And that, for the first time ever, the American Dental Association, not ever, but is in my 20 years active in the organization, that we had a proactive legislative advocacy agenda. And we've always been kind of reactive to things. And this time we were proactive, and we let the world know about it. And I felt it was great for our members to see that we're fighting for best practices. And then, then our members are more successful, and the whole profession wins, and that's really what I focus on, is trying to drive the profession forward for best practices, and obviously honor the trends that are happening within our profession in a good way. And it was just a lot of fun being able to do that.
Yeah. I feel like dentistry was front and center this last year, probably more than in the past at a federal level. I'm glad that you were at the helm when all of that was going on. And I know, you've shared too, just in our conversations and vocally as well, just being in that position, you automatically inherit a giant bullseye on your back, like anyone in that sort of top leadership role. What did you learn about yourself undergoing some of the big challenges that come with that, personally, professionally? I'm sure some of it was uncalled for, some of it could have been over the top. I mean, just anyone in leadership deals with, especially nowadays with so many ways people can voice their opinions, through social media, the internet, text, emails, et cetera. There's so many ways that people can come down on others, and you see it every day, right? So with you experiencing that, what did you learn about yourself enduring that this last year?
Well, I prepared myself for it, and and I don't know, any of your listeners don't know, I'm in recovery from substance abuse disorder. I'm 27 years sober, and in order to get sober, I had to change the way my brain works. And so I did that with a very direct and intentional mindfulness practice. And so my mindfulness practice was definitely one of my key tools that help me show up every single day as my best self. Throughout the past 27 years that in my path of sobriety and growth and leadership, I use those tools to really discover who I am and what I stand for. And when I chose a leadership path, and where I want to direct my leadership skills and attributes, the values had to align. And, the American Dental Association values and my values are very much in line. As president, I had no personal opinions this year. I am the representative of the organization. And so, I had to, espouse their core values, the mission of the organization and the vision of the organization. And the mission was basically, to improve the health of the public and ensure our members succeed. And they go hand in hand. It's not either one or, one before, one after. It is both. And in my mind, all boats rise with the rising tide. And in my 20 years of leadership at the levels that I served, I was very diligent about, talking about core values, mission, vision at the places that I led at. And at the ADA, I've never heard them discuss that. And that was the basic guardrails, the foundation of everything that we do. And so I was misunderstood in many ways, because many people didn't know what the core values were. Many people didn't know the mission of the ADA and the vision. And there were a lot of, people, it was a little disappointing, some of the attacks that I took from colleagues and friends at the time. But, that just comes with the job, and that's okay. And, so being in this role, it's like being in a crucible. And the pressure of the day-to-day challenges, and it was 18-hour days on a regular basis. I was on the road 225 days last year. I gave over 200 presentations last year. And, and I had to be able to, know the audience I was in front of every hour of every day, because sometimes they had 4 or 5 presentations in a day, and they had nothing. The themes of those presentations had nothing to do with each other, and the audience was completely different. So I had to be able to shift my focus to be effective in front of the people that I was in front of. And that crucible, the pressure of that, would have destroyed me had I not had a solid foundation in my mindfulness and knowing when I needed to back off and reset and sharpen my saw. Habit 7 of 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, Stephen Covey. Knowing when I needed to back off, reset, recharge, so I could rally for the next one. And so I learned a lot about my triggers. I learned I can push myself in great ways. I learned I had these abilities to be able to shift gears pretty quickly. And I felt I did a great job dealing with the drama as, not, I shouldn't say drama. So important and urgent, but also important but non-urgent stuff. I was able to spend time on a regular basis building those foundational things that may not pay off in the near future, but will pay off down the road as we get the foundation on there. And I feel that we set out to accomplish a lot of these things, and we did it. And now that I'm not in office, I see the ADA and especially the current leadership, taking some of these things and running with it and pushing it. And so I feel, because I was able to show up as my best self on a regular basis, I was able to accomplish that. I was not perfect by any means, and I'm a human being, and I'm fallible, and sometimes emotions did take over and I didn't act correctly. And, in my recovery program, if I'm wrong, I promptly admitted it. And when I was wrong, I promptly admitted it. And I went and tried to make things right. But I didn't hide my humanness, I'll be honest, but I tried to mitigate those hard days. Let's put it like that.
Yeah. And I know even in the spirit of recovery, we're taught to not have, expectations, although we are human, like you said. So I'm sure you had some expectations of what the role would entail. And that would be wise just in general as leadership to do your preparation going into it as best you can and learning from the people that have come before you and things like that. With all your preparation and, training, because I know you're also a really big trainer for almost everything. You put a lot of time and energy into being your best self, whatever you're about to go into. What did you experience that you were not expecting, either positive or negative?
Great question. So I was the president-elect for a year under Dr. Linda Edgar, and she was the president, and she did had her goals and things that were really important to her, and I supported it. And in the meantime, I'm preparing myself for the day that I took over. There's a well-defined day that I start and a well-defined day that I end, and those are not negotiable. But Linda set me up really well, and I felt the day before I took over, everything's, I'm ready. I felt I was prepared and stuff like that. Yeah, but the day I took over, the weight of the responsibility was a surprise to me because the ADA means so much to the world. And for, again, I felt this deep sense of gratitude for me to be at the helm, but the weight of the responsibility was much bigger than I expected. And I had to approve, all sorts of communications on a daily basis that we were sending to various legislators, both national and state, and Health and Human Services with the anti-fluoride narrative and the anti-science narrative, that we kind of knew was going to happen, but we didn't know it was going to happen to the level that it did. As a business, the ADA is a business, an organization, and I felt we saw some things in the tea leaves that kind of concerned me, and our board acted along that line and ended up, parting with our executive director, and he resigned because the board had a different direction that they wanted the ADA to go than he did. So as we were going through that process, I think every board member that I got to serve with, also felt the weight of the responsibility it took to be a steward of this profession was evident. And so I felt like we raised that awareness that these are the leaders that are going to drive the profession. We've been around for 160 some years, and I want it to be around for several thousand more years as we move forward. And so it was a lot more responsibility than I prepared myself for it. But, I'm also an endurance athlete, and I've done some crazy long runs at and races like the Ironman. And, I can't tell you how many times in the Ironman race, the 14 hours, some 14 hours plus, that I wanted to quit, but I just kept pushing. And so this year was a metaphor that I had experienced in the Ironman. So I'm like, I had experience. I know how, it gets hard. And when you want to quit, you can keep moving forward. And so I was able to do that and push through.
Yeah, I always relate so much in life to fitness stuff because I just think it's so parallel. But I mean, I got to ask, what's harder, this last year or doing an Ironman? What do you think?
This last year was much harder, honestly.
Okay. Yeah.
Ironman is one day. But the cool thing was, to be using the Ironman metaphor, the Ironman was just the last 140 miles of my training. I spent thousands of hours leading up to that, preparing for that. And I viewed, the training that I had to do to accomplish on game day is the same thing that I did on game day when I became president. And, and I knew what I needed to do on a regular basis. I didn't know what was going to happen on any given day for the most part. I had a calendar.
Yeah.
I knew when I had meetings and stuff like that, but all the unexpected, because I was able to show up in a good mindset, I was able to deal with the expected as well as best I could with the unexpected. And I developed a really good team of leaders, and Dr. Rosado, who's the current president. I relied on my officers, the VPs and the treasurer and the Speaker of the House, as well as my board, as well as key people around the country that I can rely upon to help manage the day-to-day expected as well as the unexpected. And I feel like we did a hard reset for the ADA, and I think we're driving the profession forward in the best possible way as a result of that.
Hey, I just want to pop in on today's episode and talk to you about this new GPT I wrote called Boundary Boss GPT. And it's for those moments where you've said yes to something and immediately felt that pit in your stomach, or maybe you've now written 5 drafts of an email because you're trying not to sound mean, even though you're exhausted and you swear you've said this thing so many times to the same person, or you're kind of sick and tired of staying late, taking it on, smoothing things over, and wonder why you're the one that's always burning out. A lot of the conversations that I have on this podcast, we often hear about people hitting these walls of burnout and oftentimes not even knowing what to say. So that's why I built Boundary Boss GPT. It's kind of like having me in your pocket when you're about to respond to a text, email, or team issue, and you just don't know what to say because your people-pleasing brain is completely hijacking you. This is going to help you have clarity, confidence, and self-respect without the guilt, over-explaining, or the drama. Go ahead and grab it in the show notes below. It's totally free, and you're going to love it. Okay, now back to this awesome conversation. I had on the podcast a couple months ago, a young doctor who's very much into, the servant leadership and showing up and serving. And she's very invested in the policy of dentistry, but she was sharing it's kind of a dying, I guess, part of dentistry where not so many people are that interested in the policy side. And she had this saying, she's like, if you're not at the table making the rules, people are going to make them for you. And so it was kind of neat to be talking with somebody who's young in her career. She's about 3 years out. And she works on a reservation and really advocating, for public health. But it made me actually think a little bit about, AA even, because I was kind of drawing some parallels and how even here at a local level, it's really hard to get people that are in, AA to show up and do service for general service or district or regional or anything like that, because people just kind of want to show up, go to meetings and, do what they want to do. And they don't think about, the greater conscience of, recovery and how their voice matters. And the way she was speaking about it kind of had me draw some of those parallels. And is that a little bit of your experience? And if so, what's some inspirational ideas or words you can give to people that are not really interested in the public or policy side of dentistry?
So I'll just kind of play off this young dentist who's working on an Indian reservation. This
Yeah.
year, HHS decided out of nowhere they were going to defund the Indian Health Service dental department, and they don't know the consequences of that. They're in an ivory tower in a four-walled room, have no idea the ripple effect of what that's going to do to the oral health of the Native American communities. And so first thing I did was call the president of the Society of American Indian Dentists and ask, how are we going to advocate to ensure that the funding so you can offer dental services gets reinstated? And it ended up getting reinstated, not fully, but mostly. And so the way I got into into organized dentistry was I was pissed off about something, and I saw that organized dentistry was the biggest lever to make things happen. And so we are at a very volatile political period in the country's history, especially around oral health. And major changes could happen if we're not up there advocating for it. And there's not that many legislators that are dentists, both at the federal level and the state level. And if we don't educate them, I think we have a professional obligation to educate them. They're going to make a decision based on the loudest voice. And if it doesn't come from us, it's going to come from the insurance industry. And because they have a very good market share of dentists who participate in their plans. And they can say, well, we speak for the dentist because we have a 90% market share. And so people don't see things unless it's hurting them. They don't get, unless it affects them, then they get involved. And I learned early on that that to be the voice of reason for best practices in the spirit of improving the overall health of the community. Our dentists, we also become more successful in our missions in providing that care. And so, but if we don't speak up, they don't know. The legislators don't know. We're in a renaissance time where things are going to change, and the old guard is stepping aside, and I'm kind of like in that middle ground as a Gen Xer, but I start to see the younger dentists especially, who are amazing communicators and are very passionate, but they also have, different styles and different passions than say I do and the baby boomers do. And so there may be a little void for a little while, but if there's a pain point that is pressed, there's not too long of a wait before people, start espousing, hey, we need to do something. And organized dentistry is the best way to do it.
Do you think dentistry as we know it is being threatened? Do you think we're at this critical threshold?
Yeah, we're under attack. Absolutely. Let's look at fluoride, for instance. It's 80 years of success and of reducing caries in our communities safely is being challenged by pseudoscience and non-science, by hype. And, that's first. Student loans are being challenged, and even dental hygiene was not classified as a profession. What the heck is that all about? And so they don't get the benefits through student loans in their training. So dental school funding is going way down. Research was threatened, and most dental schools get a good portion of their of what they are there for is to drive research forward. And, when we drive research forward, we drive the profession forward. Public health benefits are being, threatened. They're on the chopping block. And less than 50% of this country actually, accesses dental care. And we lose the public health, we lose any chance of getting the other 50%. So everything we do seems to be under attack right now, and we're heading towards a perfect storm until, we can, unless we can continue to advocate. I think dentistry is going to be much different, and the regulations that are going to govern how we practice is going to be threatened in big ways.
Yeah, you can almost feel a shift, coming. So after experiencing what you did this last year, I'm sure you learned so much, even in addition to all of your years as a leader and running your business and everything you've done. I'm sure this was an entirely new level of leadership that you learned and experienced. Do you have compassion now for people in those public leadership positions now, after experiencing what you experienced, and sometimes how narratives get spun and gossip and stories and things like that happen? Do you have more compassion, I guess, for people that are more public facing?
Absolutely. Leadership in any role could be a very lonely path.
Yeah.
Even as a practice owner, I recognize that, and I remember I was at a continuing education class with my team early on in my practice life. And I was sitting at a table behind my team, and this, feeling overwhelmed me that, wow, my team, I need to be successful because my team is relying upon the practice being successful, and their families are being supported by their jobs and their income. And I need to make sure that we are successful so they can live their best lives too. And so, but as leader of the practice, it's like, who do you talk to about those kind of things? And I was president of the Colorado Dental Association, and I had a great board with me, but there were also times when it was just me. And I was standing at that crossroads, and I had to, make a decision. And I had experienced that so many times as president of the Colorado Dental Association and also as president of the American Dental Association, that had I not been as grounded as I was with who the organization was and what they stood for and what their vision, what their mission was, what their purpose is, it would have been very difficult. Because when I'm clear on those things and I'm clear on the direction of the organization as leader, every decision I make, does it bring us closer to that vision or does it move us further away? And so those were the guardrails upon which I had to make decisions on. But it is a lonely road. And thank goodness that I had people that I can bounce things off of, because the majority of people had their own ideas of the way things should go. And it was tough. They challenged. I can't tell you how many times I got asked, well, who gave you the authority to make that decision? And basically, you did when you voted me, or your representative did when they voted for me. But it was a lot of misunderstandings on their part and misrepresented expectations of what they feel is possible and what we should be doing. And I was playing, and I always do this, I play a long game. All right. And unfortunately, we live in a culture that demands short-term wins. And I know the foundation that we established and are continuing to establish for the organization is going to be a foundation which we can build upon to make us and allow us to continue to be the most influential dental organization in the world. And I'm really proud of that. But it was tough, absolutely tough. And, like I said, leadership is a lonely path. And thank God I was able to develop a support group that I could just vent and guide, and drop things off on and help me reset myself to my true center.
Yeah, that's so important. What are some of the biggest, if you had to say a handful of the biggest lessons you learned this last year, what would they be?
Like I got to, like I said, really, keep the center with core values, mission, vision, reminding everybody who is members, anyone in the profession, that this is who we are and this is what we stand for. And by keeping that front and center, it made it very clear for things. And then, I didn't have to be everything to everyone. And people pleasing is a trait for many dentists, especially we want to make sure our patients are happy, our staff is happy. And a lot of times we drift away from that true center just to kind of ease the tension of a disgruntled patient or ease the tension of a disgruntled member. But really, that's where the drift happens. And so it really helped me stay forward. And then, knowing when I was being pushed to my triggers and identifying my own personality traits that were coming out, my own physiology in the body when I'm stressed, I can recognize that. And I know I need to not answer a question because it could make things worse. And I needed to back off and say, I need a day or two to figure this out and let's talk tomorrow. I learned an awful lot about myself in the crucible. I was able to accomplish much more than I ever thought I could being under the crucible too. And that was pretty cool, and I met so many people this year across the country and across the world. And it was such a blessing to be in the role that I was in. And the role that I was in afforded me the opportunities that very few get to do, and I will take that with me everywhere I go and cherish it. Maybe someday I'll even write a book about it because it was so special. Yeah, it was so special.
What's next after such an incredible year and so many lessons and experiences? And my gosh, being able to process all of it and distill it and be with it. I'm sure so many emotions, but what's next on the horizon for you?
So wellness is a big part of who I am. And I felt I did a great job raising the narrative and raising the conversations above the line, talking about that. 82% of our colleagues are experiencing signs of clinical burnout. Substance abuse is way up. Depression is way up. Anxiety is way up. We've got a mental health crisis in our profession going on, and it doesn't have to be that way. And I really feel that it is because many of us, lost our way, the same little drift that happened. And I think many are working as dentists, but they're not, living out in their purpose. And I've got so much experience now. And I left that job as president as the most informed dentist in the world, just from the portfolio of experience that I got to experience over the course of the last several years. But I want to help dentists. I want to help our profession. And I want to help keep driving things forward. I am starting a leadership development coaching business where I can help people kind of get realigned into their purpose and align all their actions along that way to remind everyone that they can have great lives. And you don't have to hit rock bottom like I did to make changes. And, and I hope that can be a great resource in that realm. I'm also on advisory board for a couple of startup companies, technology companies, which is very passionate. I'm very passionate about. And I'm also Dr. Rosado, current president, amazing leader. I think he'll be remembered as one of the greats. He is has a project. One of his pillars is Oral Health 2050. What does the delivery of oral health look like 25 years from now? And so I'm chairing that work group to imagine what the delivery of oral health will look like. And so I get to, kind of, amalgamate all of my experience into things that I'm passionate about to continue driving the profession forward. I'm not going back into clinical practice at this time, but I hope to do some mission trips with some of my friends out there that are organizing them. And so I can, experience different cultures. And so I'd still get to do some clinical dentistry here and there because I loved being a dentist, and then I want to get back into my endurance racing shape and maybe get some races on the calendar in the future and, just live my life to the fullest extent like I always do.
Yeah. Well, that sounds incredible. And so when are you going to kick off the coaching biz?
So we're at the end of January right now. I hope to, have everything finalized by early March and moving forward from there.
So excited to have you in the coaching space and everyone getting able to work with you. It's going to be the coolest.
Yeah, it's going to be fun getting to trudge this with you and march this with you. So it's going to be great.
Yeah, for sure. And I know you said you leaned a lot even on what you learned in recovery too over the last, it's ingrained in us anyways as we show up every day with the principles inside of us. But what aspects do you think did you lean on the most from your 20 plus years, almost 30 years sober, did you have to really go, okay, this principle is really key right now. I need to honor this.
Well, I learned along my path my why. And I am a catalyst for positive change in the world. That's my why. Simon Sinek's books, Start With Why, was very impactful to me. And it made me really, dig down and look at it. And I realized I had been doing that kind of thing, catalyst for positive change. I was attracted to organizations and people who were in a growth phase and they were contributing positively to the world. And, when we hit our bottoms, I was at a crossroads. Do I want to live? Do I want to die? And that's scary for us. And when I chose that I wanted to live and I got humbled to recognize the state that I was in, that I needed help, and I decided, and I was willing to do what it took to get that help. As I got better, I got inspired to live my best life. And so every day for me is a bonus day because frankly, the way I was going, I should have been dead on that day when I got sober. I could have very easily chose to end it and I didn't. And so I want to maximize every day. And when I got into recovery, and I still go to, recovery meetings on a regular basis, and I work with other people in recovery. I surround myself with people in recovery, and the people that are working their program actively are exciting people to be around. And they all have this feeling of every day is a bonus day. So that's really what drives me. And when I got sober, I wanted to use that as a catapult into living my best life. When I ran for president, I didn't want it to be the end. I wanted to be a catapult into something, next and something bigger that I can use the experience to continue to be a catalyst for positive change in the world. And it's all driven from getting, sober and working the recovery program that 12 Steps offer us.
Yeah, I hear a lot of humility and surrender still. Like, it's always a cycle like that for me too. And it sounds like when everything gets really, really tough and really hard, it's like you're surrendering to your why, the primary thing that was driving you, and having the humility to go, all right, I'm not gonna fight this fight. I want to get back to center. And you keep referencing that, which is great. I don't know what you've named your business yet, but maybe it could be back to center. Because I feel like you keep, that's something cool about you, is getting back to center. But I really love that you're saying that, because that's something I always talk about too, is a lot of people don't really know what their why. They don't know what's driving them, or they have something and it's not theirs. That's something I talk a lot about, is we get very conditioned to inherit other people's beliefs and what other people expect of us and want from us. And then we somehow convince ourselves that that's our why. And then we work as hard as we can. Because in dentistry, there's so much of an inner drive and inner competition, and a desire to prove, and a desire to be somebody. And a lot of dentists are making up for something that happened to them in their past, or, and then you're in a profession where it's not as, you get beat up a little bit, compared to other doctors. And so there's so many layers to it. And if you're not really, really clear on what's important to you, and then actually honoring that, because a lot of people say, my family's my priority, and then they're home, 1 hour a week, they're
Right.
they're working, or they're doing so many other things, and that someday when I get to that thing, then I'll be able to do this, instead of living it every day. And that takes conscious work and conscious effort. So I think that's something that I see time and time again too, is people not having that core. And I love recovery a lot for that, and coaching. I always joke it takes a village to keep me on the beam, because it's so easy to forget, right? We remember, we forget, we remember, we forget. And I think the beauty of coaching, and even the community of recovery, is it consistently reminds me of who I am. And it's like, okay, right. And so then I can stay on the beam a little bit longer and have that support, and not doing it alone, versus getting swept up in the tide of society, culture, expectations, what other coaches are doing, or other business people are doing, or what other dentists are doing, or entrepreneurs are doing. We're constantly looking and seeing, well, should I be doing that? And you can get lost in the sauce like real fast that way.
Yeah. If you stand for nothing, you fall for anything. A lot of us have, drifted away from our purpose, or never even identified their purpose. And, I spoke to 31 dental schools over the last couple of years, and, we talked about mission, vision, things like that. And I asked the dental students, raise your hand if you ever did a vision statement. And none of them raised their hands. And I reminded them, you did a personal statement when you applied to dental school of what you wanted to accomplish as a dentist. That's your first vision statement. Keep it in front of you. Remind yourself of the reason you went into this amazing profession. Because dentistry affords us the opportunity to live amazing lives. Okay, for dentists, for dental hygienists, for dental assistants, for administrative staff, if it's played right. Okay. And I feel like, what did I love most about being a dentist? It's the relationships I had with my patients. It's the relationship I had with the team that I surrounded myself with, and the impact that my work had on some of my patients was transformative for them. And, and I got to experience that, not just in my pocketbook, but in my heart. And my team got to, experience that too, because they all contributed to that happening. We love that part. And so, translate this back into organized dentistry. The benefit system that we're in, it doesn't work. It's not working. And it's forcing us, because, we haven't had an adequate raise in reimbursements in decades. The cap it's limiting, it's restrictive. I had a different word in my head. I didn't say it because we're trying to be professionals here. But, and it's really driving us to be, we have to be a lot more high volume in the current, practice model. And so we're treating teeth and we're not treating people. We're missing out on the fruits of that amazing relationship opportunities that we have with our patients. And so we burn out, and, we have to remind ourselves to slow down. Where could we be more effective? And in our practice, we can fuel that fire that's in our heart that fuels our passion. And when we don't get to do that, of course, we're going to burn out. And and benefit system is definitely a big part of why that's happening. Benefit system that we're in is definitely a big part of why we're having workforce issues, because we can't afford to offer the career opportunities that we used to be able to offer to our office managers, our administrative personnel, our dental hygienists, our dental assistants. Because the money's just not there. But every part of that team is so important to the success of the patient outcomes. And it's not going well. And so things are about to really change. And I feel like we're on a track to do that. But, the doctor-patient relationship is a sacred cow for me. And I know it's for many, but we have to intentionally find ways to make that a bigger part of our practice lives. Because as I said, dentistry offers us this opportunity to live amazing lives, but we forget to do that because we're so busy and then burned out or exhausted at the end of the day from the work that we had to go through just to make ends meet. But with that, I feel like the golden age of dentistry is right in front of us. I had, one of my pillars last year was wellness. I think we discussed that enough today, but my second one was reconnecting the mouth to the body. And, we learn in dental school how important oral health is into the overall health of our patients. But the benefit systems that we're in disconnects that for us. And that's not right. There's too much evidence that shows the importance of improving oral health and overall health, that we can't ignore it anymore. And we're seeing a movement of dentists who are exploring whole health dentistry. Dr. Pankey, taught us. I never had a tooth walk into my office. Get to know that person that's attached to those teeth, and we may be able to treat their oral conditions. And I see that happening now, in a movement that's amazing. I'm in Denver, Colorado, and we just had the Rocky Mountain Dental Convention this past weekend in downtown Denver. And, I think over half of the convention was dedicated to medical dental integration and exploring the opportunities. Imagine if the benefit system, paid us appropriately for the work we did, tying those two things together. That's what we're working on. Mm-hmm. And it's I think the beauty of the future is really bright. So I'm excited.
Heck yeah. I love that. Yeah. Awesome. Well, Dr. Brett Kessler, you are the absolute best. Always love having you on. I could talk to you all day and just soak up all your wisdom. I'm super excited for seeing what you create this next year. You're such a force, and I know you'll do it with 100% heart and determination and just a lot of love for the profession and for the people that you can impact. Thanks for being you. Thanks for always being your authentic self and being such a role model for what's possible and continuing to do the work and showing up every day, one foot in front of the other. And just your commitment is super inspiring. And I'm honored to call you a friend, and thank you for the impact you've had on my life, which continues to unfold in the coolest of ways. So thank
Absolutely.
You for that. The ripple effect that you're committed to has definitely been impactful. So thank you so much. You're the best.
No, it's great to be here. Thank you for the opportunity to share some of my observations and experience with you and anyone who's listening. And, and I always just want to say, if anyone's struggling out there, reach out for help. Help's available. Doesn't have to be that way. We remind yourself you are your most valuable asset. Take care of yourself as such. So thank you.
You just listened to The Real Talk of Dental. If it hit, if it stung, if it made you feel just a little more human, good. That's the point. This isn't about fixing practices, it's about healing people. And if you're brave enough to show up real in this industry, you're my kind of leader. Subscribe, call in, send your wildest workplace confession. And most importantly, don't clean up for anyone. The mess, that's where the magic lives. We'll see you again on the next episode.